Ete hui whaia te mātoranga kia marama. Kia whae take ngā mahi katoa, tūmaha, tūkaha, aroha atu aroha mai tātou I a tātou katoa. When you open up a copy of an ancient text or a medieval text, a critical edition will have a chunk of gibberish at the bottom of every page. This gibberish is the app-crit, the apparatus criticus, a meticulous record of the manuscript tradition. All ancient and medieval texts come down to us in manuscripts, specific physical copies held in specific archives, and that means they have textual variants, because manuscripts are written by hand, and every scribe makes mistakes, no exceptions. Even when a text survives in only one manuscript, it's often possible to detect mistakes. In a critical edition, the main part of the page is the editor's best effort at reconstructing the correct text based on their review of the manuscripts and other information. The app-crit records the important variants. It's a paper trail. Its purpose is to give you all relevant information about the manuscripts, the variant readings in different manuscripts, and editorial suggestions for correcting errors in the text. The app-crit is a superpower for readers. It gives you the ability to judge for yourself what the correct text is, whether you agree with the editor's choices or not. We're going to look through 4 examples in 4 languages. We'll start easy and work our way up to more difficult situations. Example 1 is the Hildebrandslied. The Hildebrandslied is a fragmentary 8th or 9th century poem in Old High German in which the hero Hildebrand unwittingly encounters his son Hildebrand in combat. This is the first page, with the text and app-crit as they appear in Wilhelm Braune's edition. The app-crit is in German, which is fair enough for a German poem. Each entry is marked off by large horizontal gaps. The entry gives a line number, text as printed, and further information depending on context. Where a word from the text is quoted, it's followed by the source for that reading. In this example, the source is the manuscript each time, because there is only one manuscript of the Hildebrandslied. Roman type is used for the textual readings. Italics are used for the editor's annotations. This is a standard practice. It makes it nice and easy to tell which words belong to whom. We'll see this again in examples 2 and 3 later. As I said, there's only one manuscript, so the variants in the app-crit are suggestions made by modern editors, not variants from the manuscript tradition. The first entry, for line 3, Hildebrand, reads, Statt des N hat die Handschrift H, Hildebracht. Instead of N, the manuscript has H, Hildebracht, similarly in lines 7, 14, 30, 36, 45. HS is short for Handschrift, manuscript. In most languages, the abbreviation is MS for manuscript, manuscriptum, and so on. So, this entry indicates that the editor has normalized the manuscript spelling Hildebracht to Hildebrand every time it appears. But the manuscript is very consistent. The H is clearly not an error, so which spelling is more authentic? Hard to say. I don't have enough expertise in Old High German to evaluate that. Maybe you can. The point of the app-crit is to give you the data so that you can use that data to make an evaluation. The next 3 entries are also spelling normalizations. The manuscript has Ringer, Where, and Welches. The editor, who knows more Old High German than I do, thinks there needs to be an extra H at the start of each word. The next entry, line 13 mir, is a more radical alteration by the editor. That's a grammar thing, not a spelling thing. One thing this app-crit does not comment on, and it ought to, is the string of dots in lines 10 and 11. A string of dots like this indicates a lacuna, a gap in the text. There's no gap in the manuscript, but a modern editor has judged that there's a chunk missing. Here they think there's a gap because of the syntax. The context is that this is part of a speech that Hildebrand is making. The first part is in indirect speech. He asked in a few words who his father was among the men and the people. But from Edo Hueliches onwards, it switches to direct speech, quoting Hildebrand's exact words. Which lineage do you come from? Tell me the one thing and I'll know the other. Virtually every edition of the Hildebrandslied does the same thing here, and since we're talking about it, I'll say I don't agree with marking a lacuna here. Slipping from indirect to direct speech may be a solecism in 19th century prescriptive grammar, but that doesn't mean it's wrong for 9th century poetry. Moreover, there's alliteration in the half-lines on either side of the supposed lacuna, exactly as there should be in German alliterative verse. Fireo, Folcher, Hueliches is a legitimate alliteration in Old High German. Example number 2 is in Old Norse, the Våluspá, the Prophecy of the Seeress. This is the most famous poem in the Elder Edda, mainly because of its account of Ragnarok. Here's the first page in Ursula Dronke's edition of the Poetic Edda with text, translation, and at the bottom the apparatus. We'll focus on the first 2 stanzas. The apparatus is in English. It's a little more complicated now because there's more than one manuscript, and that means textual variants. The entries follow the same pattern. We get line number, printed text, then a variant followed by the source for that variant, and any other relevant information as needed. As before, the editor's annotations are in italics. Again, this is excellent practice. It makes it totally clear which bits come from the manuscripts and which bits are annotations. Let's unpack the first entry. 1/2 Helgar, square bracket, so h r. 1/2 means stanza 1, line 2. Helgar is the text as printed. So h means this is what manuscript h has here, thus h. R means omitted in manuscript R, or rather R omits. Is a very standard abbreviation. Notice, by the way, that Dronke has put Helgar in square brackets in the main text. The idea must be that she wants to indicate, even in the main text, bits that are missing in the most prestigious manuscript, R. The second entry for stanza 1, line 4 indicates that Dronke has chosen the spelling Heimdallar from manuscript H rather than Heimdallar from manuscript R. Again, there are square brackets in the main text for the letter that's missing in R. And so on. The last 2 entries, for Thou and Ividhiur, have an extra comment. See MSR corrections. These are cross-references to a different section of the book. You'll need to consult the contents page to see that this refers to a section following the poem at page 88. It turns out these words are places where a correction is written into the manuscript. This is informative, but not efficient. In a critical edition, you want to give information as economically as possible, and there are better ways to report a scribal correction. You don't need to send the reader on a treasure hunt through the book. A detailed comment, like the one on Ividhiur, which talks about detecting a correction with the help of ultraviolet light, does deserve a place in a commentary. But the others shown here could have been dealt with in the apparatus. Later on, we'll see some more economical ways of doing this. One more thing, the manuscripts. What are H and R in the apparatus? How are you meant to know what they are? These are the manuscripts, they're the basis for the text, right? Well, what if you want to double-check them? How do you track them down? A critical edition shouldn't just report what the manuscripts say, it should give you the ability to check them yourself. So how do you track them down? And here, unfortunately, Dronke's edition falls flat on its face. She is not generous in explaining the manuscripts. You'd be excused for trying to find H and R in her list of abbreviations in the introduction, but it's standard practice to make manuscript abbreviations separate from other abbreviations. So once again you have to go hunting. This is not a good design choice. It turns out that Dronke gives her account of the manuscripts in 2 places. First, the book's general introduction gives 2 of the abbreviations, buried in the middle of paragraphs. Second, there's a more detailed account following the poem, again with the abbreviations buried in the middle of paragraphs. And, by the way, this section is titled the Introduction to the poem, even though it's placed after the text of the poem. And this is 46 pages into the introduction. Dronke doesn't tell us where the manuscripts are, which libraries they're in, their call marks in the libraries, or which folio numbers in the manuscript contain the poem. Admittedly, most editions wouldn't include folio numbers, but I think they should. Dronke has made this more difficult than it needs to be. I'd actually say this is verging on obfuscatory. Manuscripts are fundamental to the idea of a critical edition. Information about them should be both convenient and informative. So, as a counterexample, here's how I would draw up a list of manuscript abbreviations for Dronke's edition. The ideal practice is to give the abbreviations, in a list, directly at the start of the text, where each manuscript is held, a city and library, its call mark, folio numbers, and an approximate date when the manuscript was made. It took me a couple of hours to track down this information, and those hours should have been spent by the editor, not by me. Remember, the entire purpose of a critical edition is to make manuscript information easily accessible, not to assume the reader already knows it. On to example number 3, in Latin. This is from Statius's Thebaid, an epic written in the 80s and 90s CE about the legendary war of the Seven against Thebes. This is an excerpt from Book 10 in the 1972 edition by Robert Derrick Williams. Again, the appcrit follows the same basic format. A basic entry starts with line number, then gives the text printed and its source, then variants and their sources. Most of the entries in the appcrit are just reports of alternate readings in different manuscripts. Where the editor does add further notes, they're in italics, like in the previous examples. And again, this is excellent practice. Even better, Williams uses bold type for the manuscript abbreviations. This is awesome. The extra notes are in Latin, which makes sense for a Latin poem. But, then again, the introduction and the line-by-line commentary following the text are in English, so there is a case for using the same language in the appcrit. When this edition was published, it was practically compulsory for people working with Latin literature to use Latin in the appcrit, and the notes are pretty clear. For line 312, in altos, the note reads, "Garrod suspects this is corrupt, without good reason." For line 317, lucrata, the note says, "Garrod insists this can't be tolerated, but see note on this place." This is a cross-reference to the commentary. The abbreviations vid not add hl are mildly annoying. Vid not is clear enough, I guess, but for the last bit, add hl, there's already a perfectly standard abbreviation, add lock. Williams has switched things up unnecessarily, and that's unkind. What about the manuscript abbreviations? Williams makes the manuscripts relatively easy to find. There's an easily accessible list right at the start of the text headed sigla, Latin for abbreviations. It includes the libraries, the call marks, and the approximate date for each manuscript. As well as that, you can see at the bottom, this edition uses a much more efficient way of indicating where a manuscript has a correction written into it. Manus correctorum sic citantur means different correctors' handwriting is reported as follows, with a superscript 1 or 2 by the manuscript abbreviation, or an R if it was written in by someone in more recent centuries. Still, there are some complications here. First, this time we've got 16 abbreviations, but that's fine, because Williams's reference list makes it easy to sort them out. But the use of Latin in the appcrit has a knock-on effect here. It means some of the names in this list are difficult to interpret. Most of them are place names, indicating the city where the manuscript is kept, but it's often difficult to interpret Latin names for modern cities. Even for an experienced reader, some of these names are quite difficult. Worse still, one of them is actually wrong. If a manuscript is called Codex Paracinus, with a manuscript number, hopefully you'll understand straight away that means it's in Paris, in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. But some of the others are much harder. Matritensis doesn't look much like Madrid, which is what it means. Guelpherbutanus looks even less like Wolfenbüttel, and that one's extra hard because Wolfenbüttel isn't exactly a household name. And Medicaeus isn't even a place, it's a specific collection of manuscripts at the Biblioteca Laurentiana in Florence. Basically, these Latin names are intended for specialists who already know their way around the manuscript collections and where they are. I'll repeat what I said about example 2. Best practice is to include city names and library names either in their native language or in one modern language, even if Latin is used for the call mark. Fortunately, the American scholar Ryan Bauman has made a list of Latin library names used in manuscript lists, and he's released it for free online on GitHub. You can find a link below. Bauman has done a real service here. If you scroll through this, you'll find Brussels, Cambridge, Florence, Leipzig, Madrid, Paris, even Wolfenbüttel. Still, it wasn't complete at the time I recorded this clip. I messaged Bauman with some abbreviations that were missing, and he's added them now. Collections in Cheltenham, Bamberg, Càssola. They're in his list now, but no list can account for idiosyncrasies like when Williams uses Rofensis, Rochester, to refer to a manuscript that's actually in London. Still, Williams's manuscript list is a huge improvement over our previous example, but it's still not optimized. Some 21st century editions do a better job, but you are going to be looking at older editions and less convenient editions a lot of the time, so you have to be prepared to deal with this kind of thing. There are a few more complications. First, some of Williams's abbreviations are lowercase letters. 2 of them are Greek letters. Williams didn't invent these inconsistencies, he's inherited them from older editions, but he should explain them. because they conflict with modern standard practice. The standard, ideally, is that a lowercase letter represents a derivative manuscript, where we also have the manuscript it was copied from. And a Greek letter represents either a lost manuscript that was the ancestor of some surviving manuscripts, also known as a hyparchetype, or alternatively a group of manuscripts which share similar readings. And Williams does actually use this practice too. The Greek letter omega near the bottom refers to the consensus codicum praeter P, readings found in manuscripts other than P. That's standard usage, that's good. It's the ones further up the page that are non-standard. Another problem is that because most of this list is copied from an older edition, Williams records one manuscript, N, as being in the Phillips collection in Cheltenham, the Codex Keltoniensis. The trouble is, that collection had ceased to exist 50 years before this edition came out. The manuscript was in Cheltenham when an older edition of Statius, edited by Klotz, was published in 1908, but this manuscript has been in Dublin since 1925, in the Chester Beatty Library, catalogued as manuscript number 76. Checking basic stuff like this should be the editor's job. There's one more complication, but it's back in the app crit. The obelus symbol, the dagger. It's used in the app crit, but not in the main text. Again, this is contrary to standard practice. It needs explanation. Normally, in a modern edition, daggers are used to indicate a corruption, a place where the original text is unrecoverable. It's sometimes jokingly called a dagger of despair because it means the editor has given up. That isn't what the dagger means here. Here, it indicates a feature in the manuscript. The scribe wrote a word, then above the line wrote a dagger, or rather a cross, and a variant. Here's an example from manuscript Theta, the Madrid manuscript, at line 308. Non-standard practices like this dagger need explanation. Clarity is one of the most important jobs of an app crit, second only to accuracy. Remember, the purpose of the app crit is to make information easily accessible. On to example 4, this time in ancient Greek. This is the opening of the Hymn to Aphrodite, a 7th century BCE narrative poem about a love affair between the goddess Aphrodite and the mortal hero Anchises. This is the standard edition by Filippo Càssola. To put it bluntly, we need a new standard edition. Cassola's edition is better than the old ones by Allen and Baumeister. His textual criticism is fine. That's not the problem. The problem is that this edition is horribly esoteric. It's designed to keep out the unwashed masses, to be accessible only to an inner circle of experienced scholars. As a quick taster, look at the layout. Notice anything? We've got the app crit underneath the text. Fine, but think about the languages you can see on these 2 pages. The poem is in Greek, the app crit is in Latin, and then we've got the facing translation, which is in Italian. The introductory material is in Italian too. 3 languages. If you're using Italian for the translation, use it for the app crit. Using an extra language there isn't for anyone's convenience. Let's check out the list of manuscript abbreviations. It's exactly where you should expect it to be, at the start of the collection of hymns, so that's fine. It's clear, no abbreviations buried in the middle of paragraphs, but it's pretty threadbare. There are 30 abbreviations, including 16 manuscripts and 2 papyri, but there's not much information about them. Everything's in Latin, so we have the same problems as in example 3, with the extra problem of having to know an extra language. We don't get dates, we don't get any descriptions of the manuscripts. By 21st century standards, this is pretty slack. 2 of the abbreviations are Greek letters. Again, this is something inherited from older editions. We get 4 abbreviations referring to groups of manuscripts. Notice that 2 of these groups include other groups. Theta includes readings in X, Psi includes readings in P and Theta, which also includes X. And if you work through the list, you'll find that Psi actually means all manuscripts except H, J, K, and M. We've also got a whole bunch of ways to indicate corrections written into manuscripts. And we've got 2 ancient papyri. As for the Latin names, you will find them in Ryan Bauman's list, so that's good. But I had to message him to add this one, Mutinensis. It refers to Modena, in Italy. With this one, Càssola isn't preserving consistency with older editions. They used the name Estensis, for the name of the library they're in, the Bibliotheca Estense. I do like the way Càssola specifies this one, because Palatinus by itself is ambiguous. There are Palatinate manuscripts in Heidelberg, as well as at the Vatican. Marcianus is a little ambiguous as well, but Càssola doesn't help with this one. It usually refers to the Biblioteca Marciana in Venice, but it could also refer to the Museo San Marco in Florence. Here it's Venice. So, once again, I'll say the ideal is to give both place and library, with the city name in a modern language. Editors should do the hard lifting, not leave it to the reader. Let's take a look at the appcrit itself. It's in Latin, which is unnecessary, as I said. It's a signpost saying classicists only. Appcrits for other ancient languages like Akkadian or Hittite or Sanskrit normally use English or German. Still, Greek appcrits do usually use Latin, but they often stick to conventional expressions. That means you can decode the appcrit even if you're not a Latinist. There's another reference sheet you can find online by Karl Maurer, which provides a list of common Latin terminology. There's a link in the description below. Maurer's cheat sheet would get you through most of the appcrit for Statius in example 3, but it won't help you here. Càssola's Latin is much more variegated. The basic format is familiar. Line numbers, text as printed and its source, variants and their sources. Here in line 3 we've got katathneton in one group of manuscripts. The appcrit tells us that other manuscripts have it as 2 words. But Càssola doesn't just cite manuscripts, he also cites modern scholars and their suggestions for fixing the text. Some of these are in Càssola's bibliography, for others he gives the bibliographic information here in the appcrit. So, for example, in line 4 we've got die peteas, suggested by Schulze, and this is in the bibliography at the start of the book. Psi, that is, most manuscripts, give the word as dii peteas. M has dii petea. We don't get told why the editor chooses Schulze's suggestion ahead of the manuscripts. That's a bit too much to expect of an appcrit. In this case it's because Xenodotus, a 3rd century BCE Homer scholar, preferred the da spelling in a passage in Odyssey Book 4, and also because die peteas fits the poetic metre. I don't think this is very compelling reasoning, there's definitely room for doubt on this one. Line 6 has a long note. That's mostly because of the bibliographic information for the suggestion made by Hoffmann and Flach. Then there's more space taken up by 2 variant readings, and a flood of manuscript abbreviations. This suggestion is definitely correct, by the way. It's a linguistic phenomenon known as observing digamma, which was unknown to ancient grammarians. And in line 14, Càssola accepts Allen's reading herde rather than the single word that appears in the manuscripts, or Hermann's alternate suggestion. I don't know why Càssola has put a superscript 1 next to Allen's name, maybe to specify first edition, but the same reading appears in all editions of Allen's text. I don't have a strong view on whether this one is right. And now for the bad news. Some of the names you see here don't appear in the bibliography. These names are left unexplained. Abel, Hermann, Aldina, and Chalchonthelis. These are old editions of the Homeric hymns. Aldina and Chalchonthelis are the earliest printed editions from the 1400s and 1500s, published by Aldus Manutius and Dimitrios Chalchonthelis. These early editions are sometimes valuable, because they appear to have used manuscripts that haven't survived to the present day. This is all information that you need to know out of your own head to follow this appcrit. It's definitely not user-friendly. And then there's Càssola's Latin. There's no shortcut. To read Càssola's appcrit, you need to know Latin, and you need to know it well. Take the first note on lines 1 to 151. Om P foliis avulsis. First, notice that Càssola doesn't put his annotations in italics, as in our previous examples. No punctuation either. None of that user-friendly nonsense around here, thank you very much. Karl Maurer's cheat sheet covers Om, and in fact we already saw Om earlier. Manuscript P, Greek P that is, omits all these lines. But for foliis avulsis, you'll have to brush up on your Latin ablative absolutes. This bit means because the pages got torn out. I'm not sure this is information you need in an appcrit. It's not a textual variant, but fine. I'd rather he used more basic Latin, though. The biggest chunk of Latin on this page is the entry for lines 10 and 11, or 10-1 as Càssola puts it. Usque ad polemoite et ab kai aglaa in unum conflarunt e te. Conflarunt is a high-flown version of the verb form conflaverunt. You'll recognize it if you're used to reading classical Latin literature. But if you're just working through a textbook in order to read an appcrit, probably not so much. At best, this is unkind. The note as a whole translates as manuscripts E and T jam together the text up to polemoite and from kai agla a onwards. And this is shockingly silly, because what it means is E and T omit a line. The scribe's eye simply jumped from the te in line 10 to the te in line 11 and carried on. Càssola could have covered this with a simple om, but hey, why use om et when you could write usque ad polemoite et ab kai agla a in unum conflarunt et? Mustn't make it too easy for the proles, I guess. Here's how it looks in manuscript T, the Madrid manuscript. Càssola's edition of the Homeric hymns is the best edition available, but the design choices and the stylistic choices do make it very inaccessible. I have the utmost respect for the critical skills of all these editors, but everyone is thoughtless sometimes. It's easy to criticize. It's also pretty easy to use italics and punctuation marks to provide clear information, to make sensible choices about which language you're using. Some recent editions have much better practice. Some. And they still have slip-ups. Sometimes it's just in a different way. If you are writing a critical edition and you want to do some fancy stylistic thing or to follow some obsolete traditions like writing in Latin, do it, but you have to make sure it isn't at the expense of clarity or ease of access. Respect your reader. Respect their time. If your choices are designed to shut readers out, your work doesn't deserve to be published. There are harder app crits out there, but the very hardest ones, the Nestle Aland edition of the New Testament and the editions of Homer by M.L. West, are actually much better than the ones we've looked at here. They look very forbidding, and it does take a lot of work to read them, but that's only because there are hundreds of manuscripts, hundreds of abbreviations. In fact, they're well thought out, they're extremely clearly explained. At some point, maybe I'll do a separate guide on advanced app crits, like them. With the examples we have looked at here, I hope you'll be able to make headway with most other app crits. The advice I've given won't cover every situation, just as Karl Mara's guide won't help with every Latin phrase. But if you have a sense of how app crits are supposed to work, and a feel for how an edition is supposed to be organized, you'll be well placed to work it out yourself.